How has that journey from playing Dwight Schrute in The Office to becoming a storyteller, some might say an activist in climate change, how's that journey been?
Well, that's the granddaddy of all questions, isn't it?
We first met a few years ago, I think 2021, up in Edinburgh. At that point, I had not seen The Office. I'd seen the British one with Ricky Gervais, all like 12 episodes of it. So I didn't at the time fully appreciate who you were, which is someone who has brought joy to the lives of many millions of people. So thank you for joining me here.
How dare
You,
you? How
yeah.
dare you? In typical British fashion. There's
Now,
11 episodes of a British show from 20 years ago. I'm going to watch those over and over again. I'm not going to watch the 200 episodes of the far superior American version. I want to say that in all seriousness, I thank you. The British are so good at storytelling and have been since pre-Shakespeare. And the Americans just continue to borrow your great storytelling ideas and repurpose and repackage them and try and profit off them as much as humanly possible. But the British Office was, I am so grateful for it. It's brilliant, and it provided me with a long, rich career that has led me to having this conversation with you. So,
well,
God
there we
bless
go.
us,
On
everyone.
behalf of a nation, I will accept that.
Excellent.
Now, you also strike me as someone who is unafraid to dig into some pretty weighty, profound, deeply meaningful subjects that affect all of us and that divide lots of us, like spirituality. And I have your book, Soul Boom. There we go. It is thumbed. It is not yet well thumbed, but it deserves to be because it's fantastic. There's a lot of food for deep thought in there. So words like spirituality and what you call the granddaddy of all pandemics, climate change. So from an outsider's perspective, I guess you've appear to have had a pretty successful career as an actor, a character that's become iconic. And I guess first question is, how has that journey from playing Dwight Schrute in The Office to becoming a storyteller, some might say an activist in climate change, how's that journey been?
Well, that's the granddaddy of all questions, isn't it? You're going right to the heart of the matter. It's been an incredible journey, and I'm very grateful for it. I know that sounds immediately like a cliche, but I will say that when I look back on my life, it's funny. I heard someone talking about this, and I can't remember who. So, but they were saying, like, when you're young and your life is all chaotic and confusing, everything just seems random. Like you're in the middle of like a pachinko game, and your life is just bouncing around in your choices. But then when you're older and you look back, you're like, oh wow, everything really seemed to happen for a reason, whether it did or not, whether that's just the way our brains process our memories and our life stories. But for me, my life was all about being an actor. So I went to acting school. I fell in love with the theater. I just wanted to play characters. I wanted to get paid to be an actor. I did like 10 years of theater before I did any TV and film. I was on the poverty. I never made over $20,000 a year as an actor for the first 10 years of my career. And what I'm so grateful for is realizing that my life and is much larger than I initially thought. Like in my 20s and early 30s, I thought of myself as a character actor, and I would be in a regional theater somewhere, or I'd do little roles on television, playing weird characters. And that was it. That was I had in my own head, in my own consciousness, painted my life as something very small. And the success of The Office and other movies and projects that I did over the years, all of a sudden people were interested in what I had to say. And I found myself having the ability to tell stories on a much larger level, both in founding, YouTube channels like Soul Pancake and writing books like this one and a few others. And I realized that my life is much larger than I initially thought, and I had greatly limited myself. And that's really one of the messages I try and carry to young people when I'm speaking at like college campuses and stuff like that, that we unnecessarily sometimes make our lives much smaller than they need to be. And I guess I would throw that back to you, Ben. How has your life expanded, your vision of your capacity expanded over the decades than when you were kind of young, like hiker, adventurer, dude in his 20s to now
Well,
kind
I
of
mean,
trying to have a larger mouthpiece and make a greater impact?
well, I think I'm still trying to work it out. I mean, the honest answer is profoundly. I had this crazy dream as a teenager. Partly, I mean, you could boil the motivation for my entire polo career down to two words, dad issues. I grew up without knowing mine, so I was looking for male role models. I was looking for a template for what it meant to be a man, because there was a blank space where I was looking for one, and I latched onto what I now look back on as almost laughably overblown caricatures of macho individual heroic accomplishment. My heroes as a boy were all men, often with beards, obviously, always wearing big boots, usually on a mountain or crossing a polar ice cap or sailing around the world or going into space. So, and I wanted
How
to,
did you find these men as your role models? Were you reading like adventure
yeah.
magazines or what?
I mean,
Because
yeah, the shelves behind me. I mean, there's another shelf up it that, like, most of those are adventure. I think as a boy, like National Geographic, which is weird. We didn't even subscribe to it as a family. Like, I remember sort of finding a copy somewhere one day as a kid. I have just like this weird memory of the yellow kind of border around the outside of this
but
magazine.
how did male role model come to equal adventurer versus rock star or
Yeah,
military man
I think. Well,
or
also, I
corporate
yeah,
success?
swashbuckling, kind of, tycoon. Well, no, that's the plan now. But no, um, I think it was also that I was lucky enough, that there were bits of my childhood that were missing big things, but there were bits of it that were rich with opportunity and experience that in a way that most kids don't have. In that most of my childhood was in like rural southwest UK, not a million miles from where I live now. So as a young boy, I've got a brother, he's 2 years younger than me. Like, we were just outdoors the whole time, and we were able to be because we lived in a little house on the edge of this tiny village in the middle of nowhere. And if we weren't at school, which I didn't really respond that well to, I suspect I have some flavor of some sort of attention deficit disorder. I didn't respond well to sitting in a classroom, kind of with my mouth shut, being told to remember things. I learned by doing and love being outside. And I was lucky in that I spent an awful lot of time as a boy in nature. And I joined the Scouts, Boy Scouts, and I loved hiking and climbing and all that stuff. I certainly wasn't athletic at school, and partly because we moved around a bit as a family, different schools. So I was invariably the last to be picked for the football team or the year for whatever. So, but these sort of solo, hiking, climbing, being outdoors, solitude, time for introspection. That's where I got my kicks as a boy and as a teenager.
Nice. All right. It's funny that you say about, sorry, I don't mean to hijack the conversation, but I do want to say something on this because I was, for myself,
Mm,
my dad was kind of a failed artist. Like, he
mm,
always wanted to be an artist. He wanted to be a writer. He wanted to be a painter, but he would never go sell his stuff. He just had kind of low self-esteem. He didn't like rejection. So he just kind of did it for himself and never tried to make a career of it. So when I tried to make a career as an actor, I saw my dad as a template. So it was kind of male role model in reverse of like, don't be that.
mm,
Don't
mm,
be
mm,
whatever my dad is
mm,
doing. Don't do that. Do the opposite. So it
mm,
was move to New York, be an actor, hustle, climb the ladder, network, try and sell myself, which sucks and it's awful work and I hated it. But I also knew what the alternative was, which was to sit in suburban Seattle and paint in your garage and not have any success. But I was also talking to this, I was sitting at dinner with this entrepreneur and I was asking him about becoming an entrepreneur. And he said he did it in response to his father, because his father was always a failed businessman and was always broke and could never make his businesses work. So he's in this very high-end consulting, multi-billion-dollar business in response to his father, who was a terrible businessman who could never figure out how to make businesses profitable. And he's like, I'm going to figure out how to make businesses profitable. That's going to be that was his drive. So I wonder how many, I mean, we're just speaking to the men in the room, men in the podcast, but I wonder how many people's lives are just set on a course because of fathers or absence of fathers.
It's fascinating, and we're going totally off piece here, but we'll run with this because this is a topic close to my heart. I did this is well for me the sort of zenith of anything approaching fame. But I did an interview with BBC Radio 4. They have a show that's been running for decades called Desert Island Discs. I don't know if you come across this.
Yeah,
but
that's
it's
very well known. That's very famous.
And it's so it's a sort of one-to-one interview with the presenter. I did it with an extraordinary woman called Kirsty Young. And they obviously do a ton of research on the guests. I hadn't done enough research on her. I did not know that when she was a young girl, her dad got up one morning after breakfast, left the house, disappeared. And she credited much of her career with wanting to become sufficiently famous that if he was still alive, he would know where to find her.
My gosh.
And he would know that she was okay. So it was fascinating. So she as soon as I mentioned that as soon as she realized that I'd grown up without knowing my dad, this became central theme of the interview. Anyway, someone emailed the program weeks after it came out. The producer forwarded it to me saying, "We're surprised you didn't talk about US presidents." And I think it's 11 or 12 US presidents either had no contact or very limited contact with their fathers. So it's a sort of perennial recurring theme. And it seems to send, and again, we are talking about men here. This wasn't the intention for the theme, but it's interesting, in one of two directions. Like it either provides this extraordinary impetus, in some senses, maybe the mother of all chips on shoulders, or it's, I think the majority of men that are incarcerated, certainly in the UK, I'm sure in the US as well, probably don't have a dad or didn't have a dad that was around. And I think, I'm 47 now. I think you're maybe like 10 years older than me.
I am
quite sure.
10 years older.
I think when I was 27, I'd assumed that by this age, I'd have a degree of wisdom, I'd lived experience, and I'd be more certain about a few things. And I'm not sure that's the case. I think I'm just more and more perplexed at the way the world seems to be, not the world, human beings. And I think at the end of your book, you talk about fundamentally boiling the whole concept down. You're trying to talk about spirituality. Wonderfully, Wikipedia says that there is no sort of centrally agreed definition for spirituality, which makes it even more difficult topic to sort of dig into and try and define. But you talk about boiling it down to unity, and I think for me now, age 47, like part of me, it's just this like, how come we humans haven't figured this out yet? How come we're still bickering about the same old stuff? So I don't know if we can solve world peace in the next 15 minutes. But so I find myself, rather than, I think I'd imagined naively years ago that by this stage I'd be, I don't know, that my some of my beliefs would have sort of settled and solidified. I'd be more, I'm definitely more sure of myself. I know myself better than ever, and I hope that trajectory will keep going. But do I understand the world? It confuses me on a near hourly basis.
You bring up a bunch of really interesting questions and points. First of all, let's get to spirituality, because I do have this book, Soul Boom, Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution. And that's a tricky word. And you had said early on, like, it's potentially divisive, because for a lot of people, spirituality means church. And it's just synonymous with an organized religion that's been around for hundreds
Mm.
or thousands of years. And for other people, it has a very kind of woo-woo kind of, when you say spirituality, what you really mean is like incense and crystals and kind of, chakras and stuff like that. And for me, I sum it up by saying, by quoting the famous priest and philosopher Teilhard de Chardin, who says, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience."
Mm.
So this is what I know to be true, that we are all spiritual beings having a human experience, whatever that means. And this can incorporate, if you're a Christian or Hindu or Muslim or Buddhist or Baha'i, but we have a spiritual side, a soul, whatever you want to call it. We get 80, 90, 100 years in our meat suits, and then we continue our journey. And the development of that spiritual side of ourselves, that part of ourselves, our heart and soul, our spiritual qualities of compassion, of love, of kindness, of unity, of honesty, of humility, and developing those attributes is part of our spiritual journey. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's what I would say spirituality is a focus on the soul and the journey of the soul, plain and simple. Now, I know
Mm.
if you're a hardcore atheist and materialist, that's going to be nonsense. And you're going to say, we're just brains that evolved consciousness a little bit above monkeys. And when our consciousness snuffs out like a candle, that's it. That's the end of the journey. And that's fine. You can have that as well. But one thing I think we can all agree on is that these qualities, these kind of higher human qualities of centered around loving kindness and compassion and service to others and love, is what humanity needs right now. You don't have to have a spiritual belief system to understand that there is a universal, fundamental, foundational kind of reservoir of those qualities that we need to tap into. And like you just said, like, I cannot believe that in 2023, there's multiple wars all across the planet. I mean, we've got Gaza, we've got Ukraine, we've also got Sudan and Yemen, and
Mm.
probably a bunch of Congo and a bunch of other places we don't really know about. We're still trying to solve things by shooting and blowing up each other. How have we
Mm.
not learned? How have we not learned that this is not sustainable and it's not going to work and it's not going to end well?
Mm. 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 I had now. I'm an Englishman, so it's doubly kind of toe curling for me to talk about soul or having a soul, not the music, or spirituality. But I've had what you might call a spiritual experience that certainly profoundly shifted my worldview, my
Ben, we're going to
the
get
way
you
that I think.
talking about feelings. You're going to share your
Well, okay,
heart.
well,
You're going to share
strap
about
in.
God. You're going to share about transcendence. You're going to be vulnerable. You're going to go against every British impulse in your DNA.
Well, as you know, I'm an explorer at heart. I'm up for that. But no, and the irony here is that the roots of my polar career were, as I've said, were in ego. It was in this naive, mistaken belief that happiness, peace of mind, contentment, whatever you call it, lay entirely in external validation. I wanted to emulate my heroes because they were heroes. They were celebrated for what they had achieved. So my kind of, in my head, the equation was, okay, right, I have to do something difficult, and if it's hard enough and impressive enough, and enough people say positive, complimentary things about what I've done, then I'll be happy. And I realized ultimately that that's not how it works. But that's my career. Polar career had its roots in wanting to show off, and that's what I did. And along the way, sewed on these kind of metaphorical scout badges, world record, blah blah blah. But one of the really formative experiences was first arriving in Antarctica, 2013. In fact, this was just over 10 years ago. So October 2013, my first time in Antarctica. And this was for a really big, really silly camping trip, 1,800 miles on foot down there. One of the unique things about Antarctica, and one of the reasons I fell in love with this place, is that nobody owns it. It's a vast continent. Antarctica is the size of China and India put together, so it's a huge place. We know now that it also has trillions of dollars of natural resources that could be dug up and mined and drilled and exploited and sold and burnt or consumed somehow. And we sort of decided collectively as humans back in the 1950s at the height of the Cold War to actually set this place aside as the largest nature reserve on the planet, certainly the largest terrestrial nature reserve. So Antarctica it's governed by treaty, an international treaty, which means that there are no claims of sovereignty. Nobody owns this place, and therefore, if you arrive there one day, there's no border control. No one checks your passport because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you came from, like what flag was flying over the bit of the planet that you happened to be born in. Just it's the sort of one place on Earth. I mean, maybe this is true of bits of the oceans as well, but Antarctica is certainly the only continent where it doesn't matter where you came from. It doesn't matter at all. And the only thing that matters when you arrive there, and it's a place that isn't really that conducive to human existence, and whether you arrive on an icebreaker or by an aircraft, there will be other people there, other human beings, and they will have come from all sorts of other places, speaking different languages. Very quickly, you have to trust them, because they're all there because they're very good at doing different jobs. They might be a pilot or a mechanic or a satellite communications person or a medic or a chef or whatever. But you have to trust them. And to me, Antarctica is this, and this is part of the space that I don't think is understood at all. It's a uniquely Antarctic story that very few people know. It's, to me, this utopian outlying example of genuine unity in a sense. Now, geopolitically, there's still a lot of argument going on about Antarctica and how it's governed and managed, and could we exploit bits of it. But from a sort of experiential human sense, arriving there and very quickly having to sort of get on with other human beings, magical experience, and not one I've had anywhere else on the planet.
Well, was there any kind of other transcendent specific experience, or was it just kind of a sinking realization of like, wait, this is a whole different way of humans doing things?
Yeah, I'm not even sure if I immediately realized that. I think that's something that became clearer on a bit of reflection and with a bit of sort of hindsight. But to me, that's one of the really special things. Is this, and also it's the only continent that's never seen a war.
Wow.
It appears pristine. It's remarkably well managed by humans. I say managed, looked after. What the right term is, we don't really manage it. We just do stuff down there. But it's well looked after compared to everyone else. Now, I found out since that expedition that a big part of the area that I walked across early in that trip, called the Ross Ice Shelf, which is the same size as California, there was a team of New Zealand scientists did a study there, I think 2021, 19 sites, I may get this wrong, snow samples in this area of ice shelf the size of California. Every single snow sample contained microplastics. So it looks pristine, feels pristine when you're down there. I thought the snow that I was digging up at the end of each day to melt on my stove to make drinking water was the purest water on Earth. Turns out microplastics can be carried in the wind like 4,000 miles. I had no idea. So, but it's a magical place, and it's also a place that is, and again, there's an irony here because I think I first aspired to being the conqueror, the explorer, the sort of brave. It's a deeply humbling place in so many ways, and not least just the sheer scale.
Was there a beauty and majesty, sorry for the cliches, that you witnessed there that you didn't think you would? Because I can imagine you being just 1,000 miles away from any other living human being, and it could be pretty humbling and overwhelming. Did you see? Is there like the South Pole equivalent of the Northern Lights? Is there the Southern Lights down there, or?
Gosh, in some ways, given that this was a nearly 4-month silent retreat in this, unspoilt blank white nothingness with no email, no news, no social media, no people, no gossip, no nothing. 10, 12 hours a day to meditate. I think beforehand I was hoping naively that I might have time to, access some enlightened level of consciousness or reflection or inspiration. The sad truth is that you're actually pretty busy just staying alive down there and trying to cover distance. And so one of the things quite recently that has rewired my brain in all sorts of ways I didn't expect was becoming a dad, which for me was last year. So I have a 18-month-old son, and for me that there was this internal and immediate switch in my sort of time horizon. When he's my age, it's going to be 2066. What are things going to be like then? So and I know that you've talked elsewhere about parenthood and what that's meant to you, but I don't know. Can you talk about how perhaps that has changed your perspective on how you see the world, our planet, our relationship with it?
Yeah, parenthood is a paradigm shift where all of a sudden there's a creature that you've brought into the world that shares your genetic material that you're responsible for, feeding, caring, but also educating, nurturing, and not just until they're 18 and they leave for college, but for the entirety of their lives. And there is, I found, such a profound shift in how I learned to love something after that happened. Like, frankly, I wasn't very good husband. I wasn't as nearly as loving as I could have been, or friend. And having my son Walter, who's now 19, taught me how to love, because that kind of love that you have for your child it changes the whole ball game. It's a like I said, paradigm shift of the heart. So it taught me a lot about God, to be quite frank, because that's a topic I think about a lot. And this idea that God is like judgmental, like, and if you do bad things and you sin, or you steal, or you masturbate, or you have impure thoughts, or something like that, that old kind of churchy idea of God that I call him in my book Sky Daddy. If you have the Sky Daddy looking down on you, kind of like judging you or punishing you, like, that's so ridiculous. Because, like, I think about my son Walter, and you think about your kid, like, if they make mistakes or they do something wrong, or even they lie or whatever, like, you love them so much, and you continue to just love them. And yet, how much more must God, if there is a God, how much more must this God love us than we love our children? Because but it's a sample. It's a little taste, of the enormity of the power of love. And then, to me, this, I try and move this stuff towards universals. And you talked about unity, and the point of the spiritual revolution of the book really has to do with how do we as a species mature to such a point where every child on this planet is like our child, that we cannot exist as a species if innocent children are dying somewhere, whether it's in Gaza or whether it's in Israel, whether it's in Russia, whether it's in Ukraine, or kind of places forgotten by the Western world like Yemen and Sudan, where we cannot stand our compassion is so great that we cannot stand the suffering of children anywhere, and we will do whatever we can to allay that, to arrest that. And that brings us to climate change, which is, like I said, the granddaddy of all the pandemics that are afflicting humanity right now. And, a deep understanding that if we don't bring these heat-trapping gases down, if we don't really significantly change our relationship to planet Earth, that children are going to be suffering. And it sounds like a heart on the sleeve, kind of liberal, hippie, kumbaya idea, but it's just a fact. You talked about, what was it, 2066 or whatever? Like, there's
Somewhere around
now,
that, yeah.
there's extreme weather events like hurricanes are gathering within 24 hours, moving from a class 1 storm to a class 5 storm. And what's going to be happening in 2066? Is air travel going to be possible? How much more radically chaotic and destructive is our relationship with planet Earth going to be for our children and their children and children's children? So part of our spiritual journey is a deep journey into a much richer compassion for our fellow human beings that we just don't have right now. We're like a bunch of 14-year-olds, getting high and getting ready to go to rehab. And we really do, as a species, individually and collectively, need to greatly mature, and children can teach us that lesson.
Speaking of being a bunch of 14-year-olds, we talked earlier about sort of early ambition and we didn't call it this, but I guess self-actualization and the sort of interesting parallel trajectories that you and I have in getting to the top or close to the top of interesting games. And I think I heard you say recently, and this is coming back to something you touch on in the book, which is, I guess, is the flip side of ambition, which is greed. And you talked about being in the office, working in the office and making, I think you said hundreds of thousands, but you wanted millions and it was never enough. And that humans have lived for hundreds of thousands of years and never enough has helped us as a species. Like we clearly have this extraordinary capacity for ingenuity when it comes to fulfilling our own desires. But how do you think we balance that innate drive, curiosity, hunger, determination without the self-destruction you talked about earlier?
Yeah, you're 100% right. Listen, what drove us as human beings and brought us to this point is pretty fucking miraculous. But it's based in anxiety and greed. So anxiety, we go outside of our caves and we hear a rustling in the bushes. Oh no, that could be a bear. It could eat us. Oh no, we don't have enough, deer jerky stashed up in the back of our cave to get us through the winter. I want more. I'm afraid of things and I want more. I'm afraid of things and I want more. We're hardwired to be afraid of things and to want more all the time. And yeah, for me on The Office, I was sharing about that in a couple other interviews. It's astonishing when I look back how much I didn't appreciate what I had, which was one of the greatest jobs with a wonderful group of people, making a nice ton of money and providing for my family and getting to play a really unique and wonderful character. It was really the culmination of my acting career. And I wanted more. I just wanted more money or better movies or better deals or better ads and more accolades. And I did get to do movies and I did get some accolades and I did make some money. And that's the human condition. It's never enough. John D. Rockefeller, when asked how much money is enough, he said famously, just a little bit more. But the problem is we're at this crux as a species where our anxiety is killing our youth in this mental health crisis. It's driving a greed to possess more power, more stuff, both on an individual level, like we want stuff from Amazon. I just did the other day, I wanted some water bottles and I just clicked a button on Amazon and then 3 water bottles are getting delivered. And I'm like, what do I do? Is it better for me to drive to a mom and pop shop and get the water bottles? But then, I do have an electric car, but it's like, what's our relationship to stuff? We're not having that conversation. And you talked about Antarctica and the resources underneath those ice caps. And are we going to use Antarctica the same way we've used the rest of the planet and just dig it up like a mine and just suck the resources from it? And then when we have our garbage, like our plastics, and we just dump that garbage back into planet Earth? But this, Ben, is more than a political issue. It's more than a legislative issue. This is why I bring it back to spirituality, because it has to do with the sacredness of our Mother Earth and our planet. It has to do with the sacredness of the connectivity that we build between us, all the races, all our skin colors, all of our cultures, all of our countries, and building bonds of love and unity and working together in harmony is not just hippy dippy stuff. We got to do it, or we're going to perish, and our children are going to perish, and our grandchildren are going to perish. So, to me, that's why I keep bringing it back to kind of a spiritual revolution. We could talk about COP 28 and 29 and the laws we need to pass, and
possibly better that we don't. I mean, 28 of them. I'm not sure how much has been achieved. So, I did want to dig into. You talked about. I'm sort of trying to steer clear of too many sort of buzzword landmines here. But you talked about mental health, talked about anxiety, talked about young people. But climate anxiety. That is a term that was not around when you or I were teenagers. It's a term that means something now, and clearly we are facing an apparent and colossal systemic challenge that many people may well understandably feel entirely powerless or sort of bewildered, facing this thing. What or even at a loss to know what they can do or where they could start to get involved. What's your perspective on that? Do you have any advice for others who might want to do something here, might want to try themselves to move the needle somehow, but have no idea where to start?
Yeah,
What would you say
it's a
to them?
very tricky conversation, because in a lot of ways, the oil companies were kind of like, hey, reduce your own carbon footprint and stop, don't use plastics and recycle more. Those campaigns were sponsored by oil companies because they wanted to make us think like, oh, if I recycle a bunch of bottles, that's going to save us from climate change. That's bullshit. So we have to completely shift the way that we use energy, certainly ban coal. We need to stop methane. And there's lots of different ways to stop methane from going into the atmosphere. We need to legislate that. There's hard things that we need to do as humanity, as humans on the planet. I would say the most important thing that humans can do if they want to get involved in this is get educated. Like, just, it sucks. And I don't even like reading these articles. I don't like to read, Drawdown by Paul Hawken and these books that give us solutions and science and stuff, but we have to get educated, and we just have to demand major change. We've got to stop oil and gas drilling and exploration that's still happening. We've got to stop coal plants from getting built, and demand it of our governments that they be vocal about this. And we're doing it for our children and our grandchildren. And there's more to it than that, but that's the place to start. It's such a difficult conversation because there really isn't a ton an individual can do. One of the things that I'm doing with some friends is I'm involved with two sister organizations, Arctic Basecamp and Climate Basecamp, and we seek to speak science to power and speak science to culture. So we're trying to use storytelling devices to get people to think about climate change in new and unique ways.
And you've done so in some pretty unique ways. I mean, tell us about, I mean, ice cream or icebergs. I mean, either story.
Yeah, so we have a new campaign that we've just started called Save the Flavors, because people don't realize, like, the price of coffee, of cocoa, of vanilla, of pistachio is going up by 5 or 10 fold because of climate issues, because of drought, of extreme heat, of a reduced growing areas, increased kind of pests and funguses. So we had an ice cream truck in New York City, and we're just cutting together the video that we made of that, giving out free ice cream and then educating people about how our favorite flavors are going to be lost because of climate change, or they're just going to become so prohibitively expensive we're not going to afford them. And speaking of icebergs, we at COP26 in Glasgow, we towed an iceberg from Greenland and we hung it up on a chain outside of the event, so it was slowly melting as the attendees were walking into the conference center. And then we handed out bottles of glacial ice melt water. And is that going to do anything? I don't know, but we are just trying to poke the bee's nest. We're trying to tell stories. We're trying to, get people thinking of climate change on a much larger level, a more emotional level and primal level. And I do think that storytelling, like what Adam McKay is doing with Yellow Dot Studios, he'd be a great person to speak to, is a really important part of this because, and I'll just say this one last thing, my thing is like, we need to reach the movable middle. There's a bunch of like lefty, green, climate-y folks that already are trying to do whatever they can. They're already convinced. Stop making content for them. Stop preaching to the choir. And there's a part on the political right that think it's all a liberal conspiracy to just have government overreach. They're never going to change their minds. Just leave them alone. Forget it. Let them suffer. But there is a large part in the middle that they don't know what to do. They don't know exactly what to think. They're reading a lot of disinformation online and from the petroleum companies, from big oil. And that's the target, try and reach that movable middle and bring them over.
It strikes me that Dwight has an extraordinary following across that swathe of the movable middle of Middle America, you might say. Do you worry about alienating people?
I used to worry about
with a message that isn't comedy, but actually, furthermore, do you think that comedy might have a role to play here in communicating something as serious as climate change?
Yeah, we have tried to incorporate that in some of the stuff that we've done. We did a big online event that had hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of attendees called Make Earth Cool Again. And we had climate scientists along with actors and stand-up comics and musicians and, trying to use comedy to tell stories. But, for me, listen, I talk about two of the least funny and most alienating topics on planet Earth: spirituality and climate change. Spirituality is going to piss talking about that is going to piss a whole legion of people off, and talking about climate change is going to piss I've just ceased caring. I don't care. I'm in a very fortunate position. I got some money in the bank. I'm doing fine. I've got work. I'm grateful. I've got my health. But I just don't. I used to really, really care, Ben, what people thought about me. And it used to be such a horrible cross to bear. I just wanted to be liked and approved of. It drove so much of who I was as an actor and an artist. I hope you like me, kind of sad clown kind of stuff. And I'm just at the point, I just don't give a fuck. I really, really don't care what people think. I believe that we need a spiritual revolution. I believe that we need to put climate change front and center to all of our conversations. And if that alienates people and pisses them off, so be it.
Have there been? I was thinking, from my old polar world, there's certainly been some skills or hard-won experience that's serving me well now. I mean, just curious to understand if there's anything that you learned or developed in the acting world that you've taken forward with the work you're doing today.
Well,
you've clearly shed the sort of desire to be the sort of people pleasing aspect, but I'm intrigued about what's in your toolkit that is working well today.
Well, so acting is really pretty simple. You just pretend to be someone else, and they pay you for it. If you're really good at it, they pay you to pretend to be another person. And I think about that every time I'm doing acting. I'm like, this is so cool. They're paying me thousands of dollars to pretend to be this bad guy or this idiot or this weirdo or whatever the character is. So that's about transformation. Um, that's awesome. But I will say that what I have learned from my time in the theater and in TV and film, and also producing digital uh, media videos, like at a place like Soul Pancake, which was this company that we ran for a long time that made thousands of short form videos, is it's all about storytelling, and that's what actors
Mm.
do. That's what writers do. That's what directors do, producers do. And it's the most ancient and kind of most beautiful galvanizing force in human history. Humans love stories. We sat around in caves. We told stories to each other. The shaman told the stories of the hunt and the stories of the ancestors, the stories of the gods, told the myths. And we get to do that. And in your own way, you've told your story of exploration and overcoming the elements. And now you're telling new stories. And I'm not saying like, oh, I'm a shaman that's telling stories of gods and myths or something like that. I'm just a weird looking character actor. But we stories have a great power to them, and they have the ability
Mm.
to change perspective on a big level. So we just got to keep trying and keep throwing stories at the wall like spaghetti and hope that something sticks.
So I've got a couple of bonus round questions. The first one is, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot, maybe the last 10 years, because my own definition has changed quite a bit. But what does success mean to you these days? What does it look like to you now? Is it about changing people's minds, inspiring action, influencing policy, or something else entirely?
Yeah, that's a great question. Success. You know, I have this double life. So I'm an actor and I do television shows mostly, but some theater, maybe some film, and that's great. And then I also do some directing, producing, writing in the Hollywood world. And to me, I there's not a whole. Of course, I would love some more big roles and meaty roles, and I would love more accolades and more money from that path. But it's not. It doesn't hold the same power that it used to. So success for me
Mm.
is much more about like how can I harness, how can I leverage my platform as an artist, as a celebrity, as a public figure, and try and use that to make the world better. And
Mm.
for me right now, it's focusing on climate activism and on this whole soul boom thing. We're starting a soul boom podcast like everyone else. We're starting a soul boom like social media campaign about getting people thinking about big spiritual topics and questions in a fresh, unique, somewhat irreverent way. And that's kind of my way in. So more and more my success is going to be, I hope at the end of the day when I'm dead, which I hope is, at least 20, 30 years from now, um, I will be known as certainly as Dwight Schrute, but also as someone that had an impact and helped change lives. So, and I don't
Mm.
think you need a big platform to do that, by the way, ladies and gentlemen.
No, indeed. Well, as you said, like there are many, many podcasts. If this one had to be edited down to a single minute, what is the one thing, one point, one message you'd like people to take away and sort of turn
Yeah,
over in their minds?
super easy. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. We have an obligation and responsibility to our planet and to our species to make the world a better place. No matter the size of your platform, we can increase our view of our own innate capacity and our ability to change hearts and change minds. And we all have a role to play, whether it's in your cul-de-sac, church, school, or office, or family, or whether it's on a larger stage. Let's work together and strive for true loving transformation.
Here. Gosh, in the cat. There we go. That's it. We can literally edit it down to 1 minute. Rainn, I've had a delightful human experience with you today. Thank you for your insights into the power of stories and storytelling. How we can use stories just to get people thinking a little bit differently around this thing we're calling climate change. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for
I did
joining
this
us.
podcast for one reason and one reason only, and that is I want an invitation to Antarctica. When you go down there with your billionaire friends, and you've got room in under the hold,
we need to make this happen
for a weird actor, spiritual actor. Let me just slip me some bananas and sardines and take me down to Antarctica for Christ's sake.
That's a deal. I would love to make that happen, and I think we could have an extraordinary. Well, not that I've actually ever had a campfire in Antarctica. There are no trees, there's no wood, but I would love to have a round the campfire conversation with you, and I think a few other individuals that would be interesting to William. So yeah, watch this space.